know what they feel like.
Go, now!
Extraordinary gift that will change the world. We're going to show you why we're here. The dawn of a new age.
Upon closer inspection, the young woman was washing her hair, with dark blue water cascading down her back. The bystanders watched in awe, having never seen anyone's hair release such black dye while being shampooed. Turning around, her gaze was piercing enough to silence anyone daring to stare. This woman, Polaris, was none other than the daughter of Magneto. She inherited her father's superpower to manipulate metal. Just the day before, the Bullies had surrounded the mutant secret base. While helping her boyfriend escape, Polaris was captured and forced to wear a glowing green collar. This was her first time being confined in a dark room. Yet she remained composed and unafraid. Extending her hand, she attempted to unleash her power on the iron door, but the collar flashed red, and she suddenly convulsed and fell to the ground. The prisoners in the adjacent room mocked her relentlessly. Polaris began to doubt her powers. The sisters across her room reminded her that the collar, known as the Flea Collar, was specifically designed to prevent mutants from using their abilities for dangerous acts. Realizing her helplessness was due to this accursed collar, Polaris calmed herself and started planning her escape. She couldn't stay trapped in this dark room forever, especially since she was pregnant. The next day, while being escorted to a bath, a dark-skinned woman with a scarred face spat at her. Someone whispered that this woman was the leader here. The scars are a reminder of her battles with mutants. Polaris shot her a glare. If it weren't for the controlling collar, the woman would have been pinned against the wall. At lunch, Polaris purposely sat next to an albino mutant hoping to befriend him, only to find him avoiding her, likely intimidated by the scarred woman. Feeling powerless, Polaris faced the daunting task of dealing with the scarred woman alone. As they were outside, the woman started trouble, demanding Polaris wash clothes and massage her feet. After being refused, the woman raised her voice. "Believe me, you don't want to do this. Outside, you might use your powers, but here I am the one with the power." Polaris, uninterested in arguing, turned to leave. Suddenly, the woman's henchman tackled her to the ground, punching her in the face. Seeing Polaris's nose bleed, the woman gloated. Knowing Polaris was pregnant, she viciously kicked her in the stomach. This drove Polaris to her breaking point. Ignoring the pain from the collar, she summoned her remaining strength, struck the iron table beside her, and pinned the scarred woman against a steel fence. The woman's followers, seeing their leader in trouble, punched Polaris hard in the face. Fortunately, the guards intervened in time. However, Polaris was then placed in solitary confinement. As the iron door shut, she felt a surge of despair, uncertain of when she might escape. Meanwhile, a group of mutants was devising a plan to rescue her. Unexpectedly, they were intercepted by the police. A man named Reed was arrested, while Blink was severely injured and fell into a coma. While Blink was in a coma, her power spiraled out of control, creating numerous portals that began to clash with each other, threatening to demolish the mutant encampment's barriers. Fortunately, Reed's wife, Kathleen, arrived just in time with a special serum. After administering it to Blink, her powers gradually stabilized. However, the mutants faced an even greater challenge ahead. Not only did they need to rebuild their base, but they also had to rescue Polaris and Reed. Polaris stood before an iron door, her palm glowing with a murky green light while the collar on her neck emitted a red glow. Her powers were nearing their peak, yet she refused to give up, clenching her teeth and exerting all her strength. With a loud bang, the sturdy door unexpectedly swung open. Exhausted and bleeding from her nose, Polaris, the daughter of Magneto, capable of controlling magnetism, now cursed the restraining collar. Misusing her powers caused immense pain, and carelessness could be fatal. Crawling out of the dark room, weak and leaning against the wall, she was quickly spotted by the guards. It seemed her escape plan was fundamentally flawed. The mutants were discussing strategies to save both Polaris and Reed. Reed, who was not a mutant but a mutant hunter, had changed sides after discovering his own children were mutants. Moving to the mutant encampment, Kathleen, deeply concerned for her husband's safety, secretly left the encampment with her son and daughter, seeking help from her brother, a government official. He refused, fearing repercussions. And just as the siblings were about to argue, a group of weapon-wielding neighbors approached. They despised mutants and intended to eradicate them. Thankfully, Eclipse and his ally Thunderbird arrived just in time. using their powers to intimidate the neighbors. Although Kathleen managed to leave, the hostile neighbors persisted. Meanwhile, Blink, resting at the base, was alerted and swiftly ran out into the street. Purple lights flickered in her palm as she used all her might to open a massive interdimensional portal in the middle of the road. Thunderbird accelerated into the portal, securing everyone's safety. Kathleen vowed never to act alone again. Unity was essential for saving the captured. Simultaneously, Polaris's failed escape attempt led to her transfer to a more secure dark room, where she encountered an old acquaintance, Reed. Previously, Reed had tried everything to capture Polaris, but now they were both imprisoned in the same dark room. Soon, the jailers prepared to transfer them, even designing a special vehicle entirely encased in plastic, rendering Polaris's abilities useless. However, the FBI overlooked a crucial detail: Polaris's allies. Eclipse had already led a team to ambush the route the prison vehicle would take. The prison vehicle sped towards them, and Andy, who was tasked with a surprise attack, suddenly lost all his powers, his hands trembling uncontrollably, and the vehicle's tires remained intact. In the nick of time, Andy's sister, Lauren, leaped from the rooftop and caused the tires to explode. The vehicle was forced to stop. The FBI immediately sealed off area and halted the vehicle for inspection. Trader, who possessed the ability to become invisible, quietly approached the prison vehicle to locate Polaris. However, just a few steps forward, his powers failed, revealing his presence, and he was shot down by a sniper. Simultaneously, the surrounding mutants also lost their powers. Thunderbird hid in the shadows, peering out. A man with glowing yellow eyes was surveilling the area, controlling everyone's powers. Thunderbird was stunned. Wasn't this Gus, his former teammate who had supposedly been killed by the FBI years ago? How could he not only be alive, but also betray his team? Eclipse, feeling that if powers were unusable, they would have to fight with their physical strength alone, initiated a fierce gunfight. Under the cover of gunfire, Thunderbird stealthily approached and knocked out the man with the yellow eyes with a well-placed explosion. Instantly, everyone's powers were restored. Inside the prison vehicle, Polaris heard the gunfire and knew her team was outside. She persuaded the guard to remove her collar, then teamed up with Reed to knock him unconscious. Unfortunately, there were no metal weapons in the vehicle, so Polaris's powers were ineffective. At that moment, Reed revealed he had metal pins in his leg. After a moment's hesitation, a blue light glowed in Polaris's hands, and she extracted the metal pins from Reed's leg, using them to sever their bindings. Now finally free, the guard realized the situation was out of control and cried for help. The next moment, a pin struck his throat. Suddenly, the vehicle's door was blasted open. FBI agents aimed their guns at Polaris and fired. Polaris, able to deflect bullets, flicked her hand, sending the bullets reversing their course. She then pulled a bullet shard from her hand, and the FBI's guns flew out of their hands. Disarmed, they were unable to fight back. At that moment, Kathleen drove up to collect everyone, then left the scene triumphantly. The mutants' daring escape made their situation even more precarious. It was the most audacious breakout in history. Police vehicles closely followed, with drones overhead continuously tracking their location. Polaris and Eclipse couldn't escape. Eclipse told Polaris to use her powers to bring down the drone. Despite her efforts, the drone remained out of her control. Then, Polaris had an idea. She smashed the rearview mirror and threw it out the window. Using her powers, she maneuvered the mirror to reflect the drone's position. Eclipse quickly understood and directed his powers at the center of the glass, causing the light to reflect directly onto the drone. There was a loud explosion, and the drone finally fell. The two exchanged smiles and continued their escape, now with one less eye in the sky tracking them. Turner, a prominent FBI agent, had managed to intercept Polaris and her team. Left with no other choice, Polaris disembarked to confront the situation head-on. She showed no fear of the bullets. A simple flick of her wrist sent them scattering harmlessly away. Raising her hand, she manipulated Turner's gun to fly towards her. Turner was now in a dire situation, unable to apprehend his targets and finding himself at gunpoint. Polaris and Eclipse then took Turner to an abandoned house where they used a large metal rod to bind him, mockingly replicating the experience of wearing a collar. You like putting collars on others, right? Now you get to see how it feels, Polaris taunted. Turner was powerless to resist, completely at Polaris's mercy. Eclipse, worried about escalating to manslaughter, urged Polaris not to get too carried away. However, Polaris was not really agitated. She was merely intimidating Turner to extract information about Gus. Gus, a former enemy of the mutants whose eyes glowed yellow, had the ability to neutralize others' powers and had since joined the FBI, suggesting a hidden agenda. But Turner was tight-lipped, harboring a deep grudge against mutants. 4 years earlier, mutants had used their powers to seize power, clashing with the FBI. Their abilities had posed a widespread threat. Tragically, Turner's child had been killed during that conflict. Seeing Turner's unyielding attitude, Polaris opted for another approach. She called in Dreamer, who could peer into others' memories. Dreamer exhaled a puff of purple smoke, and Turner's memories began to unfold before her. As this occurred, the FBI surrounded the building. To buy time, Polaris extended her arms, sending iron rods flying through the windows into police vehicles, forcing the FBI to retreat defensively. Unable to breach the house, the FBI resorted to firing tear gas inside, filling the room with smoke and blinding everyone. Seizing the opportunity, FBI agents entered the building. Seeing the situation deteriorating, Eclipse quickly pulled Polaris to escape. Back at their base, Dreamer relayed Turner's memories to the group. Turner had no close ties with Gus, and his memories related to Gus were vague, containing only some documents, a symbol, and a blurred image of a house. Thunderbird recognized the symbol as a tattoo on Gus's body. Reed then remembered a clue, pointing out a federal building where some mutants had been taken before disappearing without trace. Tensions rose as it became evident that many of those mutants might have been subjected to government experiments. Uncovering the secrets of this building became their top priority, lest more mutants disappear under mysterious circumstances. In a strategic move, Eclipse decided to personally investigate the files concerning Gus's fake death. Accompanied by Reed and his son Andy, they drove an inconspicuous truck, thinking they could avoid detection, but were stopped by the FBI demanding to inspect their cargo. Left with no choice, the driver reluctantly opened the trunk. However, Eclipse used his powers to create an illusion, concealing any abnormalities, and the police allowed them to continue. Upon arriving at the federal building, guarded heavily and with no direct entry possible, Eclipse discovered a structural blueprint revealing that the building shared a wall with an underground parking lot. Andy used his powers to break through the wall, allowing Eclipse and Reed to sneak into the building in search of documents, while Andy coordinated with the truck driver to prepare for any contingencies. Once inside, they found the files they were looking for. Just as Eclipse melted the lock on the door, alarm sounded throughout the building. Quickly grabbing the data from a hard drive, Eclipse destroyed the remaining files. The FBI would surely not overlook this incident and would use every means to capture them. Fortunately, Thunderbird, realizing the trio was in danger, drove to the location. However, the road was blocked by police. Polaris devised a plan, instructing Eclipse not to break at any obstacles but to drive straight ahead. Trusting his wife implicitly, Eclipse followed her instructions, but the driver was terrified, especially as an iron barrier loomed ahead. With no time left for hesitation, the driver accelerated. As the FBI opened fire, a barrage of bullets flew towards the truck, turning the driver pale with fear. Yet, a moment later, the bullets veered away unexpectedly, thanks to Polaris's intervention. Then, Lauren created an invisible pathway, allowing the truck to leap over the police officers' heads and land safely on the other side. The police pursued, but West, sitting next to Polaris, raised his hand, and a holographic glass appeared in front of the police car, splitting it into two as it diverged, causing the police to split their forces. Worried about the police catching up, Lauren expressed her concerns. West just smirked and revealed, which car? Both of those are illusions. The real truck hadn't moved at all. It was all a trick created by West. Eclipse's group had narrowly escaped a dire situation. Yet, Turner was furious over the events. That night, Eclipse received a call from an ex-girlfriend. Seeing Polaris asleep, he stepped outside to take the call quietly. His ex-girlfriend arrogantly demanded his help with a matter the following day. Polaris, already simmering with anger and suspicion, was unable to let go of her feelings of betrayal. Dreamer, her sister, joined her in seeking out Eclipse's ex-girlfriend to confront the situation head-on. Upon arriving at the residence of the drug lord, the pair encountered heavily armed guards. However, Polaris, using her formidable powers, swiftly subdued the gatekeeper and extracted the necessary memories through a haze of purple smoke. These memories led them directly to the docks, suggesting the involvement of significant smuggling operations. Meanwhile, Eclipse, oblivious to the ongoing drama and the rising tension with Polaris, continued to aid his ex out of a sense of indebtedness for her past assistance in alerting him to the prison transport, thereby enabling him to rescue his friends. His actions, driven by a complicated sense of loyalty, were about to have serious repercussions for his current relationship. Upon returning to their base, Polaris confronted Eclipse furiously. Her anger was palpable, and her threat was clear. If not for their unborn child, Eclipse's fate might have been dire. This confrontation highlighted the personal struggles within their team, reflecting the constant balance they had to maintain between their personal lives and their roles as mutants with significant responsibilities. At the same time, Reed was deeply engrossed in analyzing the data retrieved from the hard drives. His findings were disturbing. It appeared that the government, or perhaps a more shadowy organization, had been selectively breeding mutants with specific abilities to counteract particular threats. This selective breeding program suggested a high level of manipulation and control, aiming to create a pool of mutants that could be used for experiments or worse. Turner, in his own complex web of alliances and suspicions, met with Campbell, a researcher known for his ruthless methods and his involvement in creating a loyal army of reconditioned mutants. Campbell revealed to Turner a video demonstrating the loyalty training administered these mutants in a special prison, suggesting that Gus, the mutant whose eyes could neutralize powers, was among the first to undergo such reconditioning. Reed's discovery that the true mastermind behind these operations was not the government but a private military-owned corporation named Trash, which his father had been associated with for over 30 years, added another layer of personal conflict and intrigue. Although the company had ostensibly gone bankrupt years ago, the implications of his father's potential involvement in these experiments were troubling. Amidst these revelations, a woman with the power of teleportation found herself desperately trying to escape from a steel cage. Her frantic actions were in stark contrast to her disoriented mental state, suggesting she might have been one of the reconditioned mutants, her abilities and sense of self compromised by the experiments. At the same time, a kind priest had contacted the mutants' base, informing them of a group of mutants who had escaped FBI custody and found sanctuary in his church. As Thunderbird and his team prepared to bring these mutants safely back to their base, another mutant with the ability to read minds warned Thunderbird that the short-haired girl among the rescued mutants was not what she seemed. Thunderbird went to check on the situation and discovered that the woman had a tattoo identical to Gus's on her hand. The short-haired girl realized she had been discovered and suddenly, in a burst of anger, kicked Thunderbird with astonishing speed. Luckily, Thunderbird's group was large enough to restrain her. After arranging accommodations for the new mutants, Reed took Thunderbird to see his father to learn more about Charles's company. Reed and his father were not very close. Reed remembered his father as a man who had abandoned his family and was not a good person. Now, his father had returned home and opened an antique shop. When Reed entered the shop, his father showed no surprise at his appearance. Since Reed mentioned Trask's secret research room, his father only gave vague answers. Unbeknownst to Reed, his father was very conscious of keeping his work secret. Displeased with his father's resolute attitude, Reed suspected his father of experimenting on him, given that he had worked for Trask's company for over 30 years, and that his own children were mutant. Upon hearing that his grandchildren were mutants, Reed's father finally opened up. He called Reed upstairs to inquire about the special abilities of both grandchildren. Reed said his daughter could control air-to-form barriers, and his son could tear things apart. Hearing this, his father shook his head, indicating he had failed. Reed was confused. Next, his father showed him two photos, his own father, Andreas von Strucker, and his aunt Andrea, who were infamous terrorists and mutants known as Ferris or the Wolf Society. Their powers were identical to those of Reed's children. They had wanted to train Reed's father as a murderer, but his inherently good nature made him escape. Years later, he joined Trask's company to research a drug that could potentially reverse mutations. Reed, also a mutant, fell severely ill after being treated with this drug. Feeling guilty and unable to face his son, Reed's father had cut off all contact. From then on, Reed lived as a normal human. All questions resolved, Reed felt a weight lifted from his shoulders. But before father and son could reflect on their past, the FBI and Campbell arrived. To ensure his son and Thunderbird's safety, Reed's father confronted them alone. The opponents forcibly searched the house. Unable to hold back, Reed's father unleashed his power to strip others of their abilities, glowing with a golden light. Even Gus couldn't use his powers. Campbell shot Reed's father, who lost control of his powers, causing the first floor to explode. Thunderbird sensed trouble as the FBI retreated, and Reed's father was fatally shot. Meanwhile, Polaris tried to control the rapidly moving woman with the help of Esm. They eventually uncovered her tragic past. Campbell's group had captured her daughter, killed her husband, and experimented on her, ultimately training her as a hunting dog for Trask Company. The two women were now targeting a man in uniform at a bar. At that moment, the man was unaware of the imminent danger as he excitedly shared stories about his job, which he took great pride in. Polaris subtly moved her hand, and the spoon he was holding bent instantly. While he was distracted, she threw a punch that knocked him out cold. Dreamer, sitting next to him, exhaled purple smoke to read his memories. It turned out that he was the captain of Trask Company's security team. The two women had arranged to meet him just to obtain the security layout of the company. Previously, seeing a Trask hunter suffer at the company's hands had made Esme, a girl capable of reading thoughts, anxious for her family. Time and again, she implored everyone to rescue the mutants locked in Trask's laboratories. But no one knew about the company's security schematics. Therefore, Polaris and Dreamer took action. Meanwhile, Reed's daughter discovered that her grandfather was part of the infamous criminal group Ferris. Together, she and her brother had power strong enough to destroy a building. Lauren and Andy decided to test their abilities, which were inherited from Ferris. Initially, when the siblings held hands, nothing unusual happened. Andy suggested that they needed to be in mental sync for it to work. Indeed, fortunately, Reed intervened just in time, preventing the destruction of the mutant base. It's no wonder that Ferris was feared by all. The next day, Polaris obtained Trask's security map. The group discussed how to safely destroy the company's laboratory. Unbeknownst to them, Esme overheard everything, and Turner also received similar intelligence. It turned out that Esme was actually the hunter. Quickly, everyone started to take action. They planned to hide near the laboratory. Polaris, Thunderbird, and Esme were in charge of setting up the explosives. When Esme handled the detonator, she intentionally tried to sabotage it, but failed. Pretending to be scared, she explained that this was her first time on such a mission, which made her fearful. Polaris was suspicious, but considering that Esme's family was still in the laboratory, she chose to trust her. On the other hand, sisters Lauren, Andy, Dreamer, and Blink, who could open portals, sneaked into the Trask building to destroy the cameras. Initially, all went smoothly. Dreamer, using the memories of the security captain, successfully avoided all patrol teams. Despite encountering a difficult security guard, she simply used her powers to make him obey. As they were about to disable the final surveillance camera, danger struck. Turner had dispatched a large number of FBI agents to block all entrances to the building. At a critical moment, Blink's powers failed, and she couldn't open a portal. The group had no choice but to flee, with Blink trailing behind and being knocked down by Turner's steel spider. With no other option, Dreamer had the sisters Lauren run ahead, but to help them escape, she stayed behind to deal with the police and was eventually captured. Lauren and Andy, after reaching the basement parking lot and finding no way out, thought of using their combined powers. Holding hands tightly, a yellow glow emitted from them, their hair billowing as they prepared to unleash their inherited might. As the building was about to collapse into dust, Andy suddenly let go of Lauren's hand. At that moment, Turner's forces were chasing them, and the sisters were cornered into a dead end with no choice but to surrender. Outside, the Polaris group realized it was a trap and had to temporarily retreat to avoid being caught en masse. After Lauren and Andy were captured, they were locked in separate rooms. The man, whose face had been scarred by Lauren's grandfather using his powers, harbored a vengeful plan. Now that he had captured Lauren's descendants, he isolated them to force them to use their combined powers for his experimental data. Initially, Lauren and Andy refused to cooperate. Unexpectedly, Campbell brought Dreamer and Blink, then loaded a gun, intensifying the stakes. The sisters exchanged glances, knowing the gravity of a gunshot was no joke. Dreamer adamantly instructed them not to comply, to thwart the villain's objectives. But in a twist, they had to act to protect Blink. As the power accumulated in their hands, the energy measuring device seemed overloaded. Finally, they directed all their force at the opposite wall, and a blinding light revealed that half of the laboratory was destroyed. Campbell nodded in satisfaction, having obtained the ideal experimental data. At the same time, the escaping mutants were preparing a rescue plan. As Eclipse and Esme scouted ahead, they saw Turner preparing to move Dreamer's group. It seemed other mutants were also there. Eclipse tried to reassure Esme, but she quickly incapacitated him with an electric shock, then took action. First, Esme used her powers to control Turner's subordinates, deactivating the collars on all mutants and then compelling the guards to commit suicide. The guards, as if possessed, shot themselves or threw bombs at their vehicles. In moments, Turner's forces were decimated, leaving only Turner himself. Then, two mutants emerged from a vehicle. Esme, also a mutant, could combine their powers. Thus, what she was doing was merely leveraging the Eclipse group to save her sisters. In reality, Esme had expended considerable effort to reach the mutant base because she wanted to use their abilities to accelerate a plan. However, after this incident, the base mutants no longer trusted Esme. Reed quickly moved his children elsewhere, but their actions were soon detected by Campbell and Turner. They followed a group of mutant hunters who surrounded Reed's family, and with heavy artillery, reduced their house to rubble. Eddie was shot and knocked unconscious. After Blink and Polaris learned of this, they used a portal to rescue the Reed family. Although they saved them, they were soon caught by the FBI, forcing the group to play hide and seek in the woods. At that moment, Eddie faintly regained consciousness. He gestured for everyone to quickly flee. They ran to the location he indicated, finding Esme's sisters. It appeared they had anticipated everything, already clearing the nearby guards and even securing 3 vehicles. With Esme's help, everyone once again escaped from Turner. After much contemplation, the mutants at the base finally agreed to join the Hunt the Hounds plan, uniting against the federal government. Looking at the man in the smart suit, who would have guessed his mind harbored dark schemes, not only did he use mutants for experiments, but he was now organizing a meeting called Today's Humanity to rally all normal humans against mutants. As the meeting concluded, the man's speech was met with thunderous applause, a clear sign of escalating hostility towards mutants. Even mutant children were not spared from this hatred. However, mutants were not to be easily bullied and had already prepared their countermeasures. They planned to use the meeting as a diversion to keep Campbell occupied for a while. As the crowd dispersed, Campbell nonchalantly walked out of the elevator as if nothing had happened. Gritting her teeth, she waved her hand, causing a traffic light pole to crash down, blocking the road and halting the FBI's advance. While they dealt blows to the FBI, another crisis unfolded at the mutant base. Early in the morning, Thunder had led a siege around the base, trapping everyone inside. Once the police chief gave the order, they planned to invade the mutant stronghold. Shortly after, Thunder received the command to eliminate the enemy. Under Reed and Kathleen's command, the mutants quickly evacuated the base. Invisible drivers ferried the children away, while the combat-capable mutants prepared for a last stand. With all exits blocked, Kathleen realized they had to break through the walls. A young man tried punching the wall. 1-2 hits, but despite the ceiling beginning to cave, the wall stood firm. Finally, with a concerted effort, they breached the wall. As Turner launched an attack, sisters Lauren and Andy decided to stay behind to cover the others' escape, using their final trick if necessary. Suddenly, 2 men armed with cannons rushed in, followed by a man with a shockingly powerful scream. He opened his mouth and began to scream, his voice so powerful that it brought down the ceiling. But Lauren and Andy were undeterred. They clasped hands, and a bright yellow light engulfed the area. In a flash of yellow, the building dissolved, leaving only the sisters unharmed. Meanwhile, the Polaris group fled from the FBI, discovering that Campbell was about to escape by plane. Remembering all the harm he had done, Polaris couldn't let him flee. She raced to the airport, prepared to teach him a lesson. Eclipse, driving towards her, tried to calm his wife, reminding her that there were others on the plane. But Polaris was resolute. She swung her arm, and a barrier of iron bars swiftly rose in front of Eclipse's group, blocking their path. Driven by the future of mutants and her unborn child, Polaris was determined to destroy the plane today. As the plane took off, the blue light in her hands intensified. Suddenly, the aircraft began to sway violently, trying to make an emergency landing. But it was too late. A massive explosion shook the ground, leaving Eclipse and his group in shock. When they looked up again, Polaris had disappeared. Soon after, the mutants who had escaped the base organized a secret meeting. Polaris brought Esme with her. Her demeanor changed as she prepared to join Esme's camp. Esme's faction, like theirs, opposed the persecution of mutants, but Esme's methods were more ruthless. This resonated with Polaris and a few other mutants. Even Andy had left his parents' protection to follow Polaris. Whether this journey would be a blessing or a curse was yet to be seen. The pregnant girl was no ordinary person. To ensure her rest, her teammates found an abandoned weapon warehouse for her to stay. Just as they were about to enter, Polaris showed signs of labor. Suddenly, the baby in her womb astonishingly manipulated the car in front of them, stunning everyone. Thankfully, the warehouse was made of stone and cement. Otherwise, the day the child was born, the warehouse might have exploded. 6 months earlier, Polaris had led her team out of a mutant organization to join Riva's Hellfire team. This team included many experts, among them the three sisters who could read minds, known as the Frost Sisters. They followed Riva's command to fight one last battle against humans for mutant rights. But Riva was a formidable leader, and those who intended to betray or disobey her had only one fate: death. Polaris and Andy were well aware of this, so they never contacted their family, waiting until after Polaris had given birth to demonstrate their true strength. That night, Polaris went into labor. Everyone called a specialist to take her to a special delivery room, because Polaris screamed so loudly. The lights in the room continuously burst. Everyone was worried, and the specialist dared not be careless. As time ticked by, Polaris' strong magnetic field affected everything around her, nearly paralyzing the electrical system. But at that moment, the baby suddenly changed position, and despite her efforts, it refused to be born. The specialist suggested to Riva that Polaris might be suffering from psychological block, and if not resolved, she could die from complications during childbirth. Riva immediately sent the Frost Sisters to transmit calming images into Polaris' mind. Regaining her composure, Polaris exerted herself to the fullest. Lightning and sparks flew around, and a power pole outside split in half. Then, the city was plunged into darkness, and the baby was safely born. Polaris held her child, overjoyed. Meanwhile, Eclipse found out his wife had caused a citywide blackout. He immediately drove to find her, but due to a previous disagreement, Polaris did not want to see him. At the same time, Riva was preparing to act. They had rented the warehouse, and the events happening outside were already making headlines. Riva instructed the Frost Sisters to blow up the warehouse and kill the manager to eliminate any witnesses. Although the manager had agreed to keep their secret, Riva decided to kill him anyway. The Frost Sisters, wearing short skirts and red heels, quickly met with the manager and killed him. After hearing about this, Polaris urged Andy to obey Riva, to train diligently, lest he meet the same fate as the manager. Andy nodded, but an accident occurred during training. Seeing Andy distracted, Riva grew furious. Worse, Andy had secretly contacted his family, and Riva caught him. Riva lost patience, slowly opening her mouth to unleash her devastating lines for attack. Just then, Andy stood up and spoke about his homesickness, which finally earned him Riva's trust. As this man drove, his arms suddenly bulged with veins, and he felt a surge of heat rising. Immediately after, the steering wheel melted instantly due to the intense heat, almost causing the man to crash. Fortunately, the car in front was unoccupied. Reed suffered a head injury from the accident. His daughter asked him what had happened. Reed was unsure how to explain it to her. Ever since Andy left, the innate power within him had been growing stronger. Now, it had become uncontrollable, capable of manifesting at any moment. Fearing police detection, father and daughter quickly switched to another car. Upon reaching their safe house, Reed wanted to share this incident, but Marcos had been kidnapped by Riva's men. Their child had jaundice, and normal light therapy wasn't helping. Marcos, who could control light, had been forced to come here. Seeing his child, Marcus's heart melted. He gently exerted his power, and the light healed the baby's jaundice. The medical expert demanded the baby be returned to him, but Marcos hesitated, having only just reunited with his child for a brief moment. It was clear that once Polaris had cut ties, nothing could bring her back. Marcos had more to say, but the Frost siblings invited him home. They intended to manipulate Marcus's consciousness to make him leave, but he was stubborn. He managed to resist the Frost siblings' control, forcing Riva to intervene personally. As soon as Riva yelled, Marcos could no longer resist and had to leave. Back home, he told everyone everything and vowed to get his family back. To understand Riva's intentions, they sought a mutant hacker. This person was an addict. Just a whiff of a stimulant made him feel near death. Then, he would lay hands on his computer, eyes rolling back, and uncover a lot of information about Riva. Recently, Riva had taken an interest in a hospital holding many mutants. Could Riva be there to save them? Uncertain of the reason, they split up to investigate. The Marcos group headed to the hospital while Reed and his wife stayed to watch the hacker, offering drugs as motivation for his help. Eventually, they saw members of the Polaris group on the hospital cameras, apparently preparing to take someone away. Thunderbird and Blink entered the hospital through a spatial door, while Marcos and Lauren provided backup. Following the hacker's route, the Blink group quickly encountered Polaris. Former friends, now on opposing sides, Polaris forcefully unlocked all the patient doors, releasing the confined mutants. The situation quickly spiraled out of control. Blocked, Thunderbird and Blink called Marcos to intercept Polaris outside, intending to use his powers to stop the vehicle. Lauren intervened, fearing her brother inside might be hurt. However, when the vehicle stopped, Lauren realized she had been overconfident. Andy stepped out, pushed his hands forward, and both Marcos and Lauren were thrown back, nearly suffering brain injuries. Upon returning, Lauren broke down and cried to her parents. After learning Andy did not want to return, Kathleen could not accept the reality. The media soon caught wind of the hospital incident, and all staff were coerced by the Frost sisters into recording a video admitting their wrongdoing and supporting the mutant uprising. Seeing this news, Polaris was delighted yet puzzled why Riva had brought a young girl from the hospital. This girl could move objects with a mere flick of her finger. Even the writing on a glass door changed. Her abilities surprised Andy. Just then, a police car drove by. The girl playfully asked Andy if he wanted to do something fun. Immediately after, the police car malfunctioned. As the police called for backup, the girl urged Andy to showcase his powers. Andy clenched his fists and exerted force. The car door flew off. The fuel tank exploded, sending smoke billowing into the sky. The girl, clearly enjoying the chaos, laughed heartily, embodying a rebellious teenage phase. Previously, she wasn't like this. Her name was Rebecca. Previously, Rebecca had been confined in a hospital for mutants, enduring countless inhumane experiments. It was only recently that Riva rescued her and brought her into their organization. Her superpowers were growing stronger by the day. Looking into Andy's eyes, it was clear he was enchanted by this girl. However, Polaris was displeased, unsure of their next steps. Riva would occasionally disappear for days, leaving them with training tasks that kept Polaris too busy to care for her child. One day, Riva assigned them a new mission involving combat against realistic human models with guns. Andy used his powers to take them down. Polaris manipulated the incoming bullets, and Rebecca used her powers to deliver the final blow. Riva applauded joyfully, but Polaris expressed her dissatisfaction, angrily demanding a simple explanation of their actions, or she would cease participating. Unable to sway Polaris, Riva commanded the Frost sisters to do something to stabilize Polaris's mental state, as she was crucial to the team's effectiveness. Without Polaris, the group would be like bees without a hive. The Frost sisters approached Polaris, whose child in her arms wouldn't stop crying. Left with no other choice, they mentally subdued the child to make it fall asleep. Polaris, thinking her child was just sleepy, took the time to talk to the Frost sisters. Then, the eldest Frost sister led Polaris near a bank, explaining that it was built to counteract mutants. A security system would trigger an alarm if a mutant approached. This revelation infuriated Polaris. The eldest Frost then told her they needed to destroy the bank to inspire more mutants to join their cause and rise in rebellion. Polaris was quickly inspired, but upon returning to the base, she overheard the eldest Frost humming a lullaby. "This is the lullaby I sing to my child. Oh, I must have picked it up somewhere. It's all I have from my mother. I only sing it to Dawn when we are alone." Despite her denial, Polaris attacked her after this. Hearing the commotion, Riva rushed from the elevator and yelled, causing the doors to open and rescue the eldest Frost. But Polaris was furious, feeling betrayed by their lack of team spirit and constant lies. Later that evening, the eldest Frost approached Polaris again, deciding to be honest with her. She revealed that they were originally 5 sisters forced by the government to train incessantly. During training, only 3 were allowed outside, leaving 2 as hostages and potential mutant targets. Unable to act against this, the 3 would comply obediently. But when an opportunity arose with their control collars removed, they manipulated those present into killing each other, and the 3 sisters escaped. The reason the Frost sisters joined Riva was to ensure the success of their uprising so other mutants wouldn't suffer. She also promised Polaris that she would never harm her daughter. Instead, she would cherish and protect her. Touched by this, Polaris forgave the Frost sisters and focused more on her training to secure a better future for her daughter. The next day, their group dressed in black leather arrived at the bank. The Frost sisters acted first, their eyes emitting a blue light, and the security guards obediently laid down their weapons and opened the doors for them. Polaris followed, her hands glowing blue, and as she raised her hands, all the computers lost power. The bank employees pointed their guns at Polaris, but unafraid, she raised her hand and the bullets fell to the ground like rain. Riva's piercing screams seemed to rupture their eardrums. Afterward, all the bank employees were locked in a room, with only the cooperative one surviving. The bank manager arrogantly stated that the bank was built to resist mutants and that any attempt to rob it would lead to their deaths. Immediately after his declaration, the Frost sisters approached him, their eyes glowing blue, and he was compelled to confess into a phone camera. The government is truly terrible. Why discriminate against mutants? And this bank, it deserves to be robbed. After recording the video, Polaris led Andy and Rebecca to the vault. Rebecca struggled to open it, but after Andy reminded her of her painful memories, her recollection of being confined and tortured surged back. A second later, she broke open the door. Polaris called Riva over, but she arrived with the bank senior manager, who was also Riva's former lover. Once a woman becomes cruel, even her ex is game for exploitation. Under psychological control, the senior manager obediently transferred all his assets to Riva. Out of respect for their past relationship, Riva promises not to kill him or anyone else in the office. However, Rebecca is determined to destroy everyone at the bank as her form of revenge. Standing in front of the bank gate, Rebecca used her supernatural powers to mercilessly slaughter everyone, finally smiling with satisfaction. Clearly, this young woman is anything but normal. She is the epitome of pure evil. Polaris expressed her displeasure at Rebecca's cruel murders, but arguing with Rebecca was useless. She dismissed Polaris and stormed out angrily. Meanwhile, the bank robbery caused a great uproar. Many mutants have begun to rebel, which only increases humanity's hatred towards them. Mutants are burning schools and churches in protest. Amid the chaos outside, Polaris' greatest concern is her daughter's safety, leading her to entrust the child to Marcos. Holding his daughter, Marcos feared for her, but supported Polaris' decision to take her to safety. Meanwhile, Thunderbird and Blink have arrived at the bank, searching for Rebecca using Thunderbird's tracking skills. Despite the massacre, Rebecca felt no remorse and defiantly admitted to the murder. Thunderbird tries to get information about Riva's other plans from her, but she claims to know nothing. The bank robbery was on Riva's orders. It turns out there are important records related to the regime in the basement, causing Rebecca to escape immediately. After investigating, Thunderbird discovers that Regiment is a technology company in the city, likely the next target in Riva's plans. Meanwhile, as Rebecca calmly crushed a cake with her hands and enjoyed her meal, her parents looked at her with annoyance. Suddenly, Rebecca tried to run away, but the police surrounded her. Before she could use her powers, she was subdued and restrained with a collar, which calmed her parents. Unbeknownst to them, Rebecca was then brutally tortured in the hospital. One day, Riva took Rebecca out, but deep down, Rebecca still despised humans. On her first day on duty, she killed people indiscriminately and even tried to run away. Riva quickly recaptured her and detained her again. At the same time, Thunderbird captures a systems analyst who refuses to reveal anything until Thunderbird's anger scares him and reveals that all the colors in the prison are comes from Mode. Riva plans to use these colors to restore mutants in prison to their powers. Thunderbird and Marcos decide to intervene, threatening the analyst to reveal the prison location. Meanwhile, unable to bear seeing Rebecca in pain, Andy uses his powers to rescue her. After a brief moment of freedom and a passionate kiss, Rebecca's escape leads to Andy's tragic mistake, accidentally killing her in his attempt to stop her. Saddened by her death, Andy wins Riva's trust. The team led by Riva then begins a new mission by killing the captured analyst using an invisible ally. Riva's team arrives at Regiment's facility and disables the security system with the help of the Frost sisters' mind manipulation abilities. At this time, Polaris wore a hairpin, which was a gift her father left her. She uses it to remind herself that she is Magneto's daughter. After stopping the car, Andy clenched his fists and used force. The bulletproof door immediately turned into rubble. Polaris walked inside with him, both hands pointing upward, her body gradually flying up. Following the emitted blue light, the power lines immediately caught fire. As soon as the collars on the mutants were deactivated, chaos ensued. One mutant in prison snaps off his collar, and with a flick of his wrist, sets a police officer on fire. All imprisoned mutants were freed, plunging the city into turmoil. Turner, who had been off the grid for a while, was also resurfaced. A previous explosion had killed many, but Turner, narrowly avoided being expelled from the FBI, was not deterred. He joined a group led by a leader committed to hunting down mutants. Thunderbird was captured because his superpower was merely tracking. Turner slammed the gas pedal, pinning him against a wall, then took him away. Marcus's family gathered to strategize on defeating Turner, eventually deciding to seek Polaris's help. Hearing that her old friend was captured, Polaris quickly went to meet Marcos. Meanwhile, Turner began interrogating Thunderbird, who was completely chained. Despite physical assaults, Thunderbird steadfastly refused to reveal the whereabouts of Marcus's crew. Knowing Thunderbird's acute, Turner put headphones on him, hearing and blasted techno music, nearly overwhelming his senses. Thunderbird remains patient, hoping for his team's rescue. Outside, a woman stood by an iron fence, her hands radiating green light. She screamed, and the fence tore apart. Another man raised his hand, causing an explosion that sent people inside scattering in fear. Their sole purpose was to rescue Thunderbird. Polaris and her husband fought seamlessly together. Upon hearing the news, Turner could not sit idly by. He grabbed a gun and started shooting at Thunderbird. Lauren and Blink broke down the door and stormed in. Andy casually waved his hand, and the man with the gun was flung against the wall. Two more attackers rushed in. Lauren creates an air barrier combined with her brother's power, throwing them back. As the situation descended into chaos, others urged Turner to escape, but he continued to threaten Thunderbird. "Let me tell you, I will kill all your friends. They will all die," he said. As he was about to fire another shot, his gun ran out of bullets. As mutants closed in, Turner was dragged away by his own team. Finally, Thunderbird managed to wait for help. As they all headed outside, a man chased after them and shot at them. Lauren almost got hit by a bullet. Andy was furious to see his sister injured and lost control. Fortunately, Lauren was able to wake Andy's reason just in time. After escaping danger, their parents spoke with Andy. The boy thought he was grown up and stopped listening to his parents. They couldn't communicate with each other. Meanwhile, Polaris and Marcos shared a goodbye kiss. Before leaving, she told him, "My feelings for you won't change just because I love you." Beautiful and cool as she is, no wonder Marcos can't forget Polaris. Polaris then returned to Riva's side. To prepare for upcoming plans, Riva brought in a new group of people, all possessing unique superpowers. However, when Riva suddenly shouted, everyone was intimidated. Riva instructed them to train hard, but Polaris was annoyed to see her new teammates. She thought they were evil mutants capable of anything and felt ashamed to be associated with them. Polaris wanted Riva to send them away, but Riva insisted the organization needed them. If they were on the battlefield, they would be the best weapon. Polaris couldn't say anything more, but she started to feel dissatisfied with Riva. Initially, Polaris wanted justice for mutants, but now they were randomly killing. She couldn't accept such methods, but alone, she couldn't stop Riva. She had no choice but to contact Marcos and share her thoughts with him. The couple immediately understood each other. Marcos agreed to help Polaris. They then asked Blink to connect them with the leader of another organization, X. X and his subordinates lived in an underground bunker. They were very quick to gather information, but stayed out of external disputes. As fellow mutants, they still provided Marcos with a clue that Riva had sabotaged the entire surveillance camera system on a street, probably planning something there. Marcos decided to go there to check it out. Polaris wanted to gather information from the newcomers, but they were very secretive, so Polaris had to go with Marcos. They waited a long time and finally saw two cars speeding towards them. Riva stepped out with a file. The person meeting Riva was from the National Ministry of Information and Communication. Clearly, he was one of the masterminds in the war against mutants. Why he was meeting with Riva puzzled Polaris even more. Afterward, Riva and the man had an unpleasant conversation, exchanged files, and left. The man swung a baseball bat, used a bit of power, and the bat instantly caught fire. Then, a woman next to him threw it, and a chubby man behind hit it, causing it to explode midair. These were the new recruits Riva had found. After continuous training, their superpowers grew stronger, completely overpowering Polaris. To prevent Riva from using them as killing tools, Polaris pretended to be friendly and greeted them, also inquiring about their upcoming plans. But the three were extremely wary of outsiders, giving Polaris no chance to talk to them more than a sentence. With no other options, Polaris had to find another way. At the same time, Lauren and her siblings often dreamt the same dream. They were spiritually similar, but stood on completely different grounds. Lauren hoped for a peaceful world, while Andy wished for mutants to change their lives. Their differing views led to a fight in their dreams. Andy discussed this with the three Frost sisters. Seeing Andy injured, the three Frost sisters suggested he form a psychic link with Lauren so they could read her thoughts. However, Andy didn't want to coerce his sister in such a way. Meanwhile, Marcos rallied many mutant organizations who fought for justice. Ultimately, Erg was encouraged to join the fight, but relying solely on Erg's organization was definitely not enough. Reed's wife went to meet her father, Denny, asking him to inform the Department of Defense about an impending terrorist attack. On the other side, the three Frost sisters started assigning tasks to the newcomers. After completing the mission, they immediately contacted Riva. Polaris, seeing this, hurried to her room to call Marcos, having just overheard the newcomers mention Evangeline, who could exhale smoke and whose hands could turn into claws. Now an ally of Marcos. It seemed that the newcomers were on a mission to deal with her. Marcus's group rushed to Evangeline's base, but they were too late. Seeing the outcome for Evangeline, Erg considered changing his mind. Thunderbird tried to advise him, but suddenly lost patience and punched Erg in the stomach. Erg, furious, unleashed a beam of light from his eyes that sent Thunderbird flying, a punishment for his arrogance. At the same time, Lauren and her mother faced trouble. Danny, in an effort to protect himself, betrayed them. He also believed that Riva had insiders in the Department of Defense, leaving him no choice but to act as he did. Soon after, a police car appeared. Lauren urged her mother to get into the car quickly, then furiously stared at the vehicle ahead. When the bullet was blocked by a barrier, Lauren and her mother drove away. On the road, they exchanged a few words. Lauren mentioned that during her interaction with the police, she felt very strange, as if she couldn't control her own thoughts. Her mother continually comforted her. Unknown to them, Andy had indeed agreed to let the three Frost sisters try to use their psychic link to pull Lauren into their group. But Lauren wasn't easily controlled. The Frost sisters had to slowly, step by step, invade Lauren's mind. Meanwhile, the newcomers were still trying to persuade Polaris to join them. Seeing the power of the three, she became even more worried. She deliberately injured her wing and used the excuse of bandaging the wound to sneak into Riva's room. On Riva's desk, there was a map with locations marked: the White House, the Pentagon, the main headquarters of the Sentinel Service, the Capitol. It seemed that Riva was planning a final confrontation. Polaris hurriedly informed Marcos, but before they could come up with a plan, something unexpected happened. The two siblings were doing their own things, each sleeping in different places, but they met each other in the same dream. Three women with blue light emanating from their eyes stood beside the brother's bed, guiding him in his dream on how to advise his sister. They quickly resorted to emotional sibling bonding techniques. The sister took her brother's hand but regretted it a second later. Ignoring her brother's calls, she left the dream and woke up in reality. They were among the strongest mutants, each possessing unique superpowers. When they combined their powers, their strength would multiply. However, the siblings were on opposing sides, with the brother, Andy, joining the Hellfire Club, aiming to destroy the White House and the Pentagon to give mutants a chance to change the world. Lauren decided to stay with the original organization to protect the interests of mutants. Andy attempted to use the Frost sisters to persuade Lauren to join his group, but it was unsuccessful. The tension between the siblings only grew, and ultimately, Lauren disappeared. On the road, she witnessed a mutant being arrested by the police without question and immediately handcuffed. Unable to contain her anger, she used her superpowers to disable the police car. Reed and Thunderbird followed Lauren, and upon arrival, they found the damaged police vehicle. They continued to chase after her and eventually caught up with Lauren. She appeared frail, but was determined to find Andy. Reed quickly intervened to stop his daughter. After some persuasion, she finally abandoned the idea. At the same time, Max, one of the newcomers and an exceptional observer, had early on noticed Polaris's particular interest in their mission. But Polaris instantly turned guest into enemy with a threatening move that scared anyone who encountered it. An angry Max stormed off, and Polaris sighed in relief, thankful for her acting skills that prevented her discovery. At midnight, Max went to buy alcohol at a supermarket, following the timing provided by Polaris. Marcos snuck into the car. As soon as Max got in, a bright light shone on the back of his neck. "What's this? Don't move, or you'll be burned to death. What do you want? Shall we go for a drive? Just stay calm." All right, don't get worked up. I'm just going to buckle up," said Max, pretending to fasten a seatbelt. Marcos, distracted, was shot in the abdomen. The two fought for a while, and the car exploded. Marcos, clutching his wound, staggered out of the vehicle. Indeed, his trust had led him into trouble, and he gained no information while getting injured. Riva quickly realized someone was missing from her team. Whether Max was alive or dead didn't concern her. Her only concern was who had leaked Max's whereabouts. Suspicion began to rise among everyone, but Polaris remained incredibly calm, temporarily avoiding Riva's suspicion. Meanwhile, Turner had some clues. the Minister of Information and Communications revealed that a group of mutants was hiding in a tunnel. If a capture was attempted, they would surely catch many, and if necessary, they could kill them. Turner knew this action would anger more mutants. However, the minister was adamant, declaring that they didn't need to distinguish between good and bad. Any mutant should be killed. Turner would be reinstated once everything settled. Selfishly, Turner followed the minister's advice, unaware that the minister had long been one of Riva's people. Riva had promised the future minister that he would become the highest leader of humanity. Thus, the minister did not hesitate to prepare to help Riva eliminate Marcos and his allies. On the other hand, Riva also began to be cautious. Before finding Max, everyone was forbidden to leave the premises. Even the phones had no signal. Polaris couldn't contact Marcos and could only randomly vent her frustration. Meanwhile, Turner gathered the military, fully armed, ready to annihilate the mutants living in the tunnel. Erg, the leader at this location, upon hearing someone approaching, immediately ordered his subordinates to construct an illusionary wall, giving his teammates more time to evacuate. At the same time, Turner led his men into the tunnel, encountering the illusionary wall and various strange sounds. 2 of Turner's men were killed, and the rest dared not continue exploring. But Turner refused to give up. Next, the mutants' momentary negligence led them to an untimely death. Blink opened a spatial door and transported this group to another group on the surface. As Turner's men entered, Erg converted all the incoming attacks into energy. Realizing Erg's abilities, Turner's men began targeting others. After evacuating the last group, Blink urged Erg to leave quickly. However, as she was about to escape, she was unexpectedly shot. Meanwhile, Lauren and her mother managed to bring everyone to safety. Even as the police pursued and blocked their way, Lauren's mother then floored the gas pedal and charged forward. After ensuring everyone's safety, Reed and Marcos went to look for Thunderbird. Since Blink had disappeared, Thunderbird refused to leave, but the police surrounded them, so staying put meant risking capture. Reed checked the surroundings in an alley. Thunderbird's people arrived, saw his arm glowing red, and prepared to shoot, reacting reflexively. Reed grabbed the gun, which instantly turned to dust. Everyone in Reed's family had extraordinary powers, but only Andy had taken a wrong path. At that moment, he was with the 3 Frost sisters, attempting to destroy government buildings. On their way, Polaris desperately implied that she hoped Andy would realize the consequences of his actions. Reed had brainwashed Andy, focusing him on destroying government buildings to usher in a new era for mutants. The day before the action, Riva let everyone familiarize themselves with the tunnels under the government buildings. As the terrorist act was about to commence, Polaris sneaked off to talk to Andy, telling him about Riva's collusion with the Ministry of Information and Communication. She explained that what they were doing to build a free generation for mutants was just to satisfy their own selfish desires. Andy didn't believe it and refused to go with Polaris. Left with no other choice, Reed made a direct phone call. The father and son had a heart-to-heart talk, and Andy was slightly swayed. He returned to his parents' side with Polaris. Meanwhile, Riva discovered the 2 had left, but she believed they could not stop Polaris group. Riva called the Minister of Information and Communication, requesting him to send someone to eliminate the Polaris group. Then, while everyone was searching for equipment so the Frost sisters could control the consciousness of Andy's siblings, the 2 children were quickly taken away to become members of the terrorist organization. To save the children, Thunderbird stalled Turner's group with the help of Ed, eventually beating Turner until his head bled. Meanwhile, siblings Lauren and Andy arrived at the government building. Lauren tried to resist the Frost sisters' commands, but as soon as their eyes glowed blue, she couldn't resist. The children were forced to hold hands. A golden light enveloped the building. Just as they were about to leave, Polaris group timely arrived. Marcos intervened to break the Frost sisters' control. The children were saved, but both were extremely weak. To prevent Riva from causing more trouble, everyone decided to destroy her stronghold, ensuring her arrogance would end. Polaris led everyone to the parking lot. Riva's people had been waiting there for a long time. The chubby man continuously clapped his hands, and explosions occurred, separating everyone. Reed's powers grew increasingly intense. He decided to go upstairs alone to confront Riva. She opened her mouth to roar. Reed's head began to ache to the point of bursting. His hands turned even redder. Touching anything would cause it to melt. And when Riva thought Reed could no longer withstand it, Reed said directly, "Do you want the power of the Strucker family? It's all yours." After saying that, his entire body exploded with the building. It turned out Reed was the ultimate villain. But unfortunately, he couldn't survive the explosion. Although Riva was dead, the Mutants' uprising had not ended, proving that Polaris groups still had new tasks. As they were negotiating their next actions, Blink, who had long disappeared, suddenly reappeared. This scene closes Season 1 and Season 2 of the series The Gifted. Did you find it exciting? Don't forget to like, share, and comment to support us. Thank you for watching.